Scott Wright is the president of DraftCountdown.com. This is his day, his time of the year. It's actually his next 3 days here, and he joins us live on 97.3 ESPN on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Scott, how you been, man?
Hey, guys. I'm excellent. Happy draft day.
Happy draft day to you, my friend. And let's just get right to the top of this thing. I mean, do you have an inclination of what is happening with pick number 1? Because it seems like the last couple of years we've kind of known who was going to be the first name called. But because there's so many quarterbacks in this class, it seems a little murky at the top.
Yeah, and, there's all kinds of reports today that are making it seem like Baker Mayfield is the Browns at number 1 is a done deal, which would shock me. I mean, I went with Sam Darnold from USC in my final mock draft. He was the top every mock draft I did. To me, he was clearly the top quarterback in this class, and I have a hard time fathoming how you could take Baker Mayfield over Sam Darnold, but I guess this is the Browns that we're talking about, so you never know. Anything's possible. I still think there's a chance that this is a smokescreen, disinformation, whatever term you want to put on it, but I just tweeted out that if the Browns do take Mayfield at number 1 overall, he is the riskiest player they could possibly take there. He is just an outlier in every way, and he's going to have to be the exception to a lot of rules to justify being chosen where he is. So it would defy explanation to me if it were going to happen. But 5 hours out here, that seems like that's what everyone's saying. But we'll see. I'm still sticking with Darnold. I'm sticking to my guns till the very end.
When push comes to shove for you, how did you what were your final rankings for the quarterbacks? Yeah,
and Darnold's clearly number 1, and I almost gave him my 5-star grade. He was my number 3 player overall. He just missed it. Just basically a lack of experience and overall polish as a redshirt sophomore. One more year, and he probably would have got my elite grade. Then my second quarterback is Josh Rosen from UCLA. I think he's got everything. It's just a matter of whether or not he's got that Jeff George, Jay Cutler gene that kind of prevents him from ever fully maximizing that tremendous potential. Then, to me, there's a big drop-off to Josh Allen from Wyoming, who I don't even have in my top 10 overall, even though he's going to go in the top 5. Just a high-risk, high-reward prospect. Everything you could possibly want physically. He just doesn't know where the ball's going 1 of every 4 times, which is a problem. And then I have another drop-off, and those are the 3 quarterbacks I had first-round grades on. Then I had another drop-off to Baker Mayfield at number 20 overall and Lamar Jackson from Louisville at number 21 overall. So those are actually the first 2 grades outside my first round, so I have high second-round grades on them. But just too many risk factors there for me to pull the trigger, especially with Mayfield as early as he's going to go. But, nobody can say the warning signs were there, and I don't want to make the comparisons to Johnny Manziel because that's unfair to Baker Mayfield, but it's similar in that all the warning signs were on Front Street. The Browns knew exactly what they were getting into with Johnny Manziel, and it worked out exactly as one could have predicted. There's a lot of warning signs here with Baker Mayfield, too. Different warning signs, but warning signs nonetheless, whether you're talking about his size, just his overall style of play. He's had a couple of off-the-field incidents that concern some, so boy, it really would surprise me if Baker Mayfield was the number 1 overall pick in this draft, but I guess ultimately crazier things have happened.
So, Scott, while we're talking QBs, how many overall quarterbacks do you see going in the first round tonight?
It's one of the big storylines, and the record is 6 first-round quarterbacks. That was set back in 1983, the famous John Elway, Jim Kelly, Dan Marino class, and I think we have a legitimate chance to tie that tonight. I think we're going to have at least 5 quarterbacks, maybe 5 quarterbacks in the top half of the first round. We could have 4 in the top 10. And then the decider is going to be Mason Rudolph from Oklahoma State. He's on that late first or early to mid-second round fringe. And when I was working on my final mock draft, I called around, and indications I got were that he would go into the first round. And I think the New England Patriots would be a logical fit. They've shown interest in him, and they're in the market for a quarterback now, having parted ways with Jimmy Garoppolo. So I have him penciled in at the Patriots at number 31 overall, but if Mason Rudolph's the first-round pick, we're going to tie the record. So 6 quarterbacks in the first round is tailor-made for entertainment in the NFL draft.
So you mentioned that 1983 draft. I love that 30 for 30, Elway to Marino, and all the intrigue and drama that went into that. Would you put this class in 2018 up there with that 1983 class?
Well, I was only 4 at that time, so I have to preface that. But I mean, over the years, John Elway is kind of lore in the draft world. He's kind of the gold standard for quarterback prospects. So I don't know if we have somebody on his level in this class, but just in terms of the overall depth, I think you could put it on par. I mean, it's rare that you have this many guys in the first-round conversation. And part of that is supply and demand, and some of the guys are going to get pushed up, but there's always a need for quarterbacks, and there aren't always 5 or 6 first-rounders. There's been years where you struggle to find maybe 2 or 3 first-rounders. I remember the year with Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota, it was those 2, and then it dropped off pretty precipitously, it seems. So at least there's options this year, and even with all the options, there's still some teams that are going to be left standing in that game of musical chairs.
Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. So there's the quarterback overview there. Whatever Cleveland ends up doing with 1, New York really holds the next key because we all think that Cleveland's going to take a quarterback. So what about New York at number 2? Where do you anticipate them going?
Well, and I don't think the Giants are looking for a quarterback with the possible exception of Sam Darnold. And that's what should scare the Cleveland Browns if they pass on Sam Darnold, because all of these teams after them are itching for a shot at him. If he doesn't go 1, you might go 2. I think the Jets would leap on him at 3. You might see teams trying to trade up. There's going to be a feeding frenzy for Sam Darnold. So that would be disconcerting to me if I were a Cleveland Browns fan, heading into this draft. So that's definitely a storyline that I'm going to watch out for. And I'm sorry, just put my mind what your original question was.
Well, we were asking, about the Giants. What they really hold the key at that number 2 spot. So we think Cleveland's going to take one of the quarterbacks. But I guess as you kind of just indicated, it does matter which quarterback they take to really make them help them with their decision.
Yeah, and I think the Giants are ultimately going to stay there and choose between either Saquon Barkley, the running back from Penn State, and Bradley Chubb, the defensive end from North Carolina State. And I think that debate in their building is a lot closer than most realize. It could very easily be Chubb, and I went back and forth right until the last minute of my final mock draft. Eventually I went with Barkley, but at one point we thought, well, that's going to be a logical trade spot. But I think as the process went on, 2 things became apparent. One, the Giants wanted a lot for the pick because there were a few players up there that they really liked. And secondly, I think the teams in need of quarterbacks realize, well, we don't have to pay this team's ransom to go all the way up to number 2 when we can probably get a quarterback at 4, 5, 6, maybe even down at 9 at a far cheaper cost. So I tend to think the Giants are going to stand pat, but if Darnold is there, all bets are off. I mean, that might be the type of thing where if Darnold is available, maybe the Bills decide to go all in and throw that treasure trove of draft picks they have onto the table and make an offer that the Giants can't refuse. So Darnold being available past the number 1 pick could absolutely throw yet another monkey wrench into the top of this draft that's got a lot of different variables already.
Scott, wanted to ask you about, it seems like every year in the draft, somewhere somebody makes a pick that was unexpected, and it suddenly turns the draft on its head. And everybody's pulling their hair out because this was not the way it was supposed to go, and then all of a sudden a lot of frenzy breaks out amongst those teams, and maybe you see a few more trades. Where in the draft should we keep an eye out for that to happen possibly this year in terms of where that you say to yourself, whoa, didn't see that coming, and now all of a sudden teams are scrambling to try to make a trade and get up higher?
Watch out for Lamar Jackson. In my final mock draft, I had him going 27 to the Saints. I don't think he's going to fall that far. I think he's going in the top 10 to 15 overall, and it's just a matter of who's going to trade up for him. And it's tough to find where, because there's not an obvious fit like there is with some of these other signal callers. And the teams he's been linked to are more on the back end of the first round, whether it be the Saints, the Patriots. So maybe we'll see a situation similar to last year, like the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, where the Chiefs weren't on the quarterback radar at all, pretty much, and they wound up making that big, bold move. And they certainly don't regret it. I think they're very happy having done that. Now they got their franchise quarterback in tow a year ahead of time. So I think the Saints are definitely a candidate, and that's where I put Jackson in my final mock draft. But how about the Chargers at 17? I think that is a really interesting possible landing spot for him. So keep an eye on that. And then just in terms of somebody who could maybe sneak into the first round that isn't expected to be a first rounder, how about Mike Gesicki from Penn State, the tight end? And I say that just because there's only been 2 other tight ends who tested better than him at the combine since they've been tracking it, and they were Vernon Davis and Dustin Keller, and both of those guys went in the first round. So that's something to maybe keep an eye on. I don't think it'll happen, but maybe.
When you talk about these quarterbacks, and you mentioned that there could be a tie at a record that you mentioned earlier about possibly 6 going in the first round, some of them late in the first round, like you kind of mentioned there with Lamar Jackson. How important is it for these teams to get that 5th-year option, and how much does that play into whether some of those guys, if they're still available late, will end up triggering trades with some teams, including potentially the Eagles?
It can be important for the quarterback position because that 5th year is a very valuable year. Now, if the pick works out by that 5th year, you should probably know if he's your guy and you're going to want to ink into a long-term deal, or if it becomes problematic if it's the guy on the fence, maybe like Blake Bortles was, where you're not quite sure if you want to commit and it gets really costly. So yeah, I think that's definitely a factor in the decision-making process, especially at the quarterback position, and maybe that leads to a little bit of jockeying late in the first round. And, one quarterback that we haven't mentioned yet that I wanted to bring up just because I think he's going to be picked on Friday, and I think he will be the 7th quarterback, and that's Kyle Lauletta from Richmond. And if the Patriots don't take Lamar Jackson or Mason Rudolph, I think that's the guy they're going to be targeting. Another small school signal caller like Jimmy Garoppolo was, really helped himself during this pre-draft process, opened a lot of eyes at the Senior Bowl. So Kyle Lauletta, that's the name. Everybody's talking about these first-round quarterbacks, but that's the name. Once you get out of that top 2 tiers or whatever, he's going to be the next guy on the board, I think.
Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com, and Scott will be on tomorrow's show and Monday's show to wrap everything up each day with us here. Check out draftcountdown.com for his final mock draft. Scott, we talked about 1 and 2. We know the Jets trade up to 3 to get a quarterback, right? Do they have a preference? You have them taking Baker Mayfield. Do they have a guy that they hope gets to them at number 3?
Well, I mean, the guy they've been linked to is Baker Mayfield, and I think if he's there, he's their preference. But I think if they jump all over Sam Darnold, I don't think they dreamed that they'd have a chance at Sam Darnold at number 3 when they made that trade. So that would be the best case scenario for them if it worked out like that. So I think those are the 2 guys they're looking at. I think that order. I think if Darnold's there, he's the pick. Otherwise, Mayfield. I think, and that's the thing too. That if one of these other teams that really, if Mayfield doesn't go 1, he's in demand too. There are some teams, other teams that really like him. You probably can't tell by the way I've talked about him. I'm obviously a skeptic, but there are some true believers in the league. Whether it's the Dolphins, the Cardinals supposedly really like him. So there's some teams where that could try to trade up for Baker Mayfield too. And the Broncos like him, another team. So even if Baker Mayfield doesn't go number 1, he's going 3 or 5. He's going early, but regardless whether it's 1, 3, or 5, it's too rich for my blood.
And then, of course, you got Saquon Barkley. If he doesn't go to the Giants at 2, where is the next possible spot for the running back, who many people think is the best player in the draft?
There actually are scenarios where Saquon Barkley slides a little bit tonight, and that could be one of the surprises. And a couple of things have to happen. One, the Giants would either have to take Bradley Chubb or trade out of that pick. But if that happens, I don't think he's a lock to go to the Browns at number 4 if he's there. I'm not so sure that if they had the choice between Saquon Barkley and Bradley Chubb, that the Browns wouldn't go with Bradley Chubb in that scenario. And they're open for business too. They're willing to move down. They're listening to offers. If somebody wants to come up and get a quarterback ahead of the Broncos, I think they're open for business. So if he gets past there, then maybe the Broncos at number 5. I think the Broncos would have to consider him. But there's another spot where they've been commonly mentioned as a team that might trade down. So could he be there at 6 for the Colts, 7 for the Buccaneers? Crazier things have happened on draft day. So that's definitely a story to keep an eye on, especially if Saquon Barkley doesn't go 2. He could slide, and he might still be on the board an hour change into the draft.
Bradley Chubb, if there weren't all these quarterbacks in this mix, would he be in consideration for the number 1 pick? The Browns, you have them getting them anyway, but is Chubb on the level, like Garrett last year, that some of these other top picks the last couple of years, that he's just not getting the attention because of all the quarterbacks?
I don't think he's on that level, and I've tried to temper expectations with him. He's not Bruce Smith or Julius Peppers or Jadeveon Clowney or Myles Garrett. He's not that type of terrorizing threat. He's a really, really good all-around player. He's the total package, physical tools, intangibles. He converts it all to production on the field. The guy I've compared him to is Chris Long, who was the number 2 overall pick in the draft when he came out, and had a really good NFL career. He's played on winning teams. He can play different positions, different schemes, and I think that's what you're getting in Bradley Chubb. But if you're expecting routinely a 15-sack-a-year type presence, I don't think that's what Bradley Chubb is. But he could still very easily go as high as 2 overall. The Giants truly like him. They have traditionally prioritized pass rushers. It's a premium position, so there's a lot of indications that point to Bradley Chubb being the pick for the Giants at 2, which I don't know how the Giants fans would feel about that, having, I think, got their heart set on Saquon Barkley. But, I thought that was going to be the first turning point of the draft. I guess if the Browns take Baker Mayfield, it's going to start right away at number 1. But if the Browns take Darnold, then the draft really starts at 2 based on what the Giants do. It could go in a couple, 3 different directions.
Scott Wright with us, Draft Countdown. Now, Scott, I know you haven't met me in person, but I'm a big guy, so I got to ask you about one of the big guys, the Husky guys, the guys up front. Quentin Nelson, the offensive guard from Notre Dame. Can he sneak into the top 10 even as a guard?
I'm here for it to talk about the guys in the trenches. I love the offensive line play, and especially this class. And Quentin Nelson is actually my number 1 player in this whole draft, regardless of position. The best true guard prospect I've seen in the 20 years I've been covering the draft. He is truly the total package. I gave my elite grade to 2 players this year. One is Nelson, and the other was Saquon Barkley. So he's as close to a sure thing as it gets in the draft, and I would venture to guess that just about every team in the league has him among their top 3 to 5 overall prospects. Maybe he's probably going to get pushed down a little bit just because of A, positional value. It's going to work against them, and B, that early run on quarterbacks is going to push everybody down, whether you're a guard or a defensive end or whatnot. So he's going to be there, I think, maybe as early as number 5 to the Broncos. If they don't trade all that pick, I think Denver could very well take him there. Otherwise, the Colts at 6 are going to look at him. The Bucs at 7, and I think his absolute floor is the Bears at number 8. So his range is 5 to 8, which is pretty rarefied air for a true offensive guard. But if ever there was an exception to that rule, it's him.
Real far trip to go from Notre Dame to Soldier Field, right? I mean, that's right in the neck of the woods where he's already comfortable playing football.
And his offensive line coach at Notre Dame, Harry Hiestand, is now the offensive line coach in Chicago. So perfect fit.
Scott Wright, DraftCountdown.com. Now, some of the things, these are young men, but everyone's excited about them going in. Scott, who's a guy that people are excited about that maybe you think is getting too much attention?
Well, I won't say Baker Mayfield. I think I've covered that one. Let's see. I'm just looking at my mock draft. Who's maybe getting a little overrated? Marcus Davenport, the defensive end from Texas San Antonio, really talented kid. I mean, all the potential in the world, but still very much a project. He's really rough around the edges, and I think he's going to get pushed up a little earlier than he should just because this isn't a great crop of pass rushers, and he's going to be the second off the board after Bradley Chubb, who's going to go in the top 5 overall. And as we all know, pass rushers are in demand, so there's going to be more than 1 or 2 pass rushers that go in the first round. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Davenport maybe even sneak into the top 10 overall to a team like San Francisco. Otherwise, maybe to the Lions at 20 would be his floor. But more of a fringe first-round pick, and you're drafting him based more on potential than anything else. And the upside is huge, but I don't know if he's necessarily one of the 10, 15 best players in this draft where he's probably going to be selected.
Scott, when you look at this draft, and one guy who, I know obviously Philadelphia Eagles fans are kind of curious to see if the Eagles do stay at 32. It seems like Darius Geis is a guy who, for obvious reasons, has had his name a lot in the news. Is he a guy who you see potentially still being available at number 32, and does he go in the first round at all, or does he fall farther?
He could, and I only have one running back going in the first round of my final mock draft, and that was Saquon Barkley. But the other 2 guys who I think are in the conversation maybe late in the first round are Geis and Sony Michel from Georgia. And once again, it's just such a fine line between being a late first, early to mid-second round pick. And even Pittsburgh, I thought maybe could take Darius Geis at 28. And the Eagles have been linked to both of those running backs. So there are some potential spots, and maybe somebody trades up too, because even if we don't see another running back go anytime soon after Barkley, there is going to be a run, if not late round 1, early to mid-round 2. That's where you're going to start seeing Geis and Michelle and Nick Chubb from Georgia also start coming off the board, and maybe Rashad Penny from San Diego State. So, if a team is looking for a running back and they have their heart set on one of those specific guys, maybe they make a move up into the back end of the first round to get one. So Barkley's the only sure first-rounder at the position, and if another sneaks into the first round, I think it'll be more a case of the result of the specific circumstances this year.
Now, Scott, you've been doing this for a long time, and the Eagles are at 32. So kind of take us into the minds of these teams that draft 32. Eagles fans, we're not used to that, being 32 Super Bowl champions. So when you're at that spot, what is the most typical thing? Stay. We keep hearing that they want to get out of that spot because of, the contractual situations there. So give us a little insight on drafting at 32.
Yeah, and a lot of times teams like to trade out just because there's very little difference. I mean, there's no difference a lot of times between the 32nd pick and the 38th pick. You might get the same player you would have taken at 32 at 38. So teams are more than willing to move down, and if they can pick up another asset to do it. So I think the Eagles are definitely going to be looking to take advantage of that situation if they can. I gave them an offensive lineman, Isaiah Wynn, from Georgia in my final mock draft, but there's going to be a lot of guys in that mix. Connor Williams from Texas, I think could be a possibility in that range. Even Colton Miller from UCLA, Will Hernandez from UTEP. There's going to be a tremendous run on offensive linemen in that 20 to 50 range. But going back to just the situation of the Eagles at the back of the first round and whether they trade down, just on a normal year, there's a lot of parity between, as I said, 30 and 40 or 30 and 50, what have you. But especially this year, there's very little difference, and that's why those second, third, fourth, and even fifth round picks are going to be so valuable. Teams want to stock up on those because you're probably going to get, fourth rounders in the fifth round, second rounders in the third round, etc.
What's the deepest position, Scott, in the draft?
Well, I like that offensive line. I really do. I think there's some good offensive line. Obviously, Quentin Nelson's the only stud at the top, and we don't have an Orlando Pace or someone like that. But I think there's a lot of really good blockers, whether you're looking for a tackle, guard, or center. And then running back, of course. Running back's always deep. We always get a huge infusion of underclassmen at that position, and this was no exception. And I think it's the type of year where first round, second round, third round, and really all throughout the draft, you can get a player with the potential to be a productive starter in the right situation. I could give you someone in every single round. So, as always, I always say I want to wait on running backs, and I want to find the Alvin Kamara or the Kareem Hunt rather than, taking Saquon Barkley number 2 overall. And, this year, the guy I'd be targeting is Rashad Penny, who'd be, I think, maybe a second. You might even be able to get him in the third round. I'm a big fan of Rashad Penny, so that's my pick. If you need a running back, he'd be the guy I'd be targeting beyond the first round.
All right, and on the opposite scale, if you're in need of this position this year, where's the weakest spot in this year's draft?
Well, I talked a little bit about the pass rushers, how it drops off so precipitously, so quickly. And that's not to say there aren't some talented options available in maybe the second or third round, but they're all very high risk for whatever reason, whether it's durability, whether it's character, or whether it's just overall lack of production. So this is not a great year to be looking for pass rushers, which everybody always is. And if you're going to draft one of these pass rushers, I think you're going to have to do some extra work to find the right fit for you, because there's not a lot of easy answers after Bradley Chubb.
Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. Follow him on Twitter at draftcountdown, and also his Instagram. He did a live Instagram mock draft the other night, so follow him there as well. He'll be on with us tomorrow to recap round number 1, which we anticipate being kind of fun tonight, and then on Monday to recap the entire draft. We appreciate Scott always, each and every year, providing great draft insight for us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thank you, Scott.
My pleasure, guys. Enjoy the draft.